All right, we're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Christian Hangout number 36, one of my favorite numbers. Returning, we have an old friend, Anti-Dem.
Hey, everybody. I'm Anti-Dem. Thank you. Antidem.wordpress.com. And religiously, I'm one of those. I'm one of those Deus Vult type, not a fan of Pope Francis Catholics.
Okay. We have Thomas Jones with us again.
Hey, everybody.
Hello, Thomas.
How's it going?
Yeah. Well, I'm doing well. We have LUMEN Saul.
Greetings in Christ through his blessed mother, everyone.
And joining us for the first time, we have the BECHTLOFF. Hello, BECHTLOFF.
How's it going?
So, BECHTLOFF, since this is your first time, would you like to tell us a little bit about what your background is?
Yeah, I guess theologically I'm pretty much evangelical minus the Israel fetish and literal creationism. Other than that, pretty much in line with conservative Protestantism.
Okay. Were you raised in the church or anything like that?
No, actually, I was raised very irreligious and came to Christ as a young man, actually.
Cool.
You know, struggling through my God-hating agnostic years of being a teenager and finally putting the fedora away.
Always a good decision. Yeah. Were you a big fan of Neil deGrasse Tyson?
Oh, yeah, that's a big fan of
Black Science Man?
No, I'm old enough. He wasn't even a thing back when I was a teenager.
Oh, really?
Nobody had heard of him.
Yeah, I don't remember him when I was a teenager either.
It was about 5 years ago. I guess they all just decided he was the thing now.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember the first time I heard of him. I feel like it was probably about 10 years ago, but I don't know. He was just this guy that kept showing up everywhere.
He's the Zelig of atheism.
There are more stars in the universe than there are stolen bikes in his garage.
Yeah, he was. They were waiting for him. I mean, you know, can you imagine the hallelujahs that were emanating from down the hallways of the cathedral when he came on the scene? You know, it's like we don't need Lawrence Fishburne or James Earl Jones. We have the real deal now. You know, I'm not gonna drag the guy down, but it's.
Go ahead, drag the guy down. That's fine with us.
I'm trying to be a little bit charitable. I mean, he's it's affirmative action. You know, he's going to get a lot of breaks that normally wouldn't be, or maybe you can call them indulgences. From the gatekeepers. That wouldn't be granted to people of a less swarthy complexion.
And we Catholics remember what happened last time we tried giving out too many indulgences.
Yep.
Some jerk nailed 95 theses to our front door.
Well, that's yeah. I mean, that's Pope Albertus. And I believe it's just one thesis. It's about anthropogenic global warming. He's nailed to I don't know where he nailed it.
Some people don't think the church be like it is, but it do.
Thank you, Oscar Gamble. Well, real quick announcement, everybody. Hold on, just real quick. I'm going to say, for those of you who don't know, I have to get up early tomorrow, so I'm putting a 2-hour limit. We're going to wrap this up around 9 o'clock. So just so everyone is expecting a 3-hour hangout, it's going to be shorter today. So just so everybody knows.
We're not going to try and break the record then.
Well, the record, these things only go, there's an 8-hour maximum on these hangouts. We've already done that, so there's no way we can break the record. You might
I actually co-hosted all the way through a full 8-hour stream once, and yeah, it was pretty exhausting.
Wow.
I did Millennial. I co-hosted Millennial Woes' New Year's Eve stream. In fact, it seems like I do every year.
Yeah, that's what I figured it was when you mentioned that.
Yeah, I did a stream for election night that was just under 8 hours. I think it was like 7 hours, 45 minutes.
It's like going to work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you guys get lunch breaks?
When we did the 8-hour one, that was actually one of my favorites, just because at the end it was just us being silly and
because
I don't know.
You're completely delirious.
Yeah, and
you were in an altered state.
I was doing my Steven Crowder impression. That was fun.
Well, gee, guys, has anything important happened in the right in the last little while?
You know, it does seem like something happened that nobody can stop talking about. Is actually in a state that I'm very close to.
You mean Trump staring up at the sun without glasses?
And the sun blinked.
Yeah, he was staring down the sun. Yeah, that's what I was about to say.
Well, yeah, I guess it's inevitable that the topic of Charlottesville would come up because it definitely had a lot of repercussions. And we can see that they're cracking down on the right on the internet. We can see that a lot of people are talking about Nazis and white supremacists all of a sudden. A lot of stuff in the news. It's kind of weird that, and I know I say this like every single stream, but it is really amazing how in just the last few years, this whole thing went from just sort of a corner of the internet where now people I know are on TV and being discussed. So,
you know, I remember the day after the election, someone posted on /poll, you know, it's really kind of cool how we've gone from trolling each other on an internet, in an anime image board, to determining who gets to be leader of the free world within a year.
Well, if there's one thing the Charlottesville cemented in my mind, and I already thought it, it's that Richard Spencer is not a leader and should not be considered as such. I don't think he has the temperament. I mean, any sort of nationalist or white or ethno-nationalist or even civic nationalist type movement, it has to have somebody that can appeal to the working class. And I'm going to be polite and say Spencer just doesn't give that vibe off.
Yeah.
And it just was a failure of leadership. I mean, you could argue, oh, he was set up, but it was a pretty obvious setup, and there was no plan B. There was no attempt to keep things under control. And when things did go south, I mean, you know, a leader has to accept that even if something's not your fault, it's still your responsibility. He should be helping Christopher Cantwell with legal fees. He should be helping Baked Alaska with medical fees. He's a man of means, and he's not doing any of that because all he wants is to just get that hot splash of attention in his face. That's all he's ever been there for.
Well, I had two reactions. And first, BECHTLOFF and I did a stream on this like right after it happened, like the Monday after. And one conclusion we came to looking at the whole crowd, at Unite the Right, at Antifa, at everyone there. All y'all mofos need Jesus. You all need Jesus really, really bad. And I think it's time, among other things, we say, you know, you can't be anti-Christian and be on the right. Now, notice I didn't say you can't be non-Christian and be on the right.
Yes.
There's a huge amount of difference there, but you cannot be anti-Christian and be on the right. And notice some of the people who have been in the past, guys like Molyneux or Cantwell, have gotten much, much, much more. They're not anti-Christian anymore. They're still pretty solidly non-Christian, but they're not anti-Christian. And about Spencer, you know, I was talking about Charlottesville with another friend of mine who's, you know, also religious and on the right. And he said, you know, the thing that you see there more than anything is a lack of Christian humility, especially in the ones of them that like still think that this was a success. You know, Christianity is kind of like the Iron Shake. It makes you humble. Fortunately, unlike the Iron Shake, it doesn't put you in the camel clutch to do it. But, you know, Christianity is a mindset that gives you humility, the ability to self-reflect and say, where have I been going wrong lately? And I think a lot of these guys on the, you know, the white nationalist alt-right who are very anti-Christian, who get a sense of self-worth from the race they belong to instead of what they do, there's no humility in there. There's no ability for self-reflection. And you just can't have leaders that are like that. You can't even have rank and file that are like that, but you really can't have leaders that are like that. I
fail to understand how by any metric somebody can call Richard Spencer right-wing. Other than, you know, he doesn't like black people is the closest grasping at straws you can come to. The guy, he's socially liberal on issues like abortion and homosexuality. He's damn near advocating open socialism. I mean, I don't know. When I was a kid, we called those leftists.
You mean the old Robert Byrd style leftist?
Yeah, I mean, you know, they joke. You know, some of the cucks started calling the white nationalists just racist liberals, but on a few of them, yeah, that's kind of right. These are guys that swear they're sure of it, that if we had only white people, we could make socialism work, and we could make a civilization built on bathhouses work.
Yeah, like you've been saying, it's like you can't have a message that's, you know, no blacks in my gay bathhouse. That's not something that's right, and it's not something that's going to resonate.
See, I'm glad that we've had everyone, you know, including Spencer, and I'm going to agree with you guys, but you know, Mike Enoch, Cantwell, all these guys, because I think that the phase that we're at right now, it's still, you know, a lot of people are thinking about, you know, reaching out to normies and you know, providing, you know, some sort of ideological incentive to normies. But I really think that we're still in the phase of, you know, just kind of shaking up the, you know, shaking the tree for the fruit that's, you know, already almost ripe. That being said, I do worry about anyone in charge who is inimical to Christianity, because I've always said, and I was an atheist for about a decade before I came back to the church, but even so, I always respected the church. You know, I always understood that it had a lot to do with what got us here. And what worries me about, especially people who young guys are looking up to, if they don't have that, they're already a good part of the way, you know, down the road towards nihilism, which got us into this position in the first place.
Yeah, you know, you can't have, you know, childless cosmopolitans. And I mean, for example, the big thing about Cantwell getting kicked off of OkCupid, you can say what you want about that, but why is someone who is a big figure on the right on OkCupid in the first place?
Yeah, and maybe this is just a chance for us to start talking about this. You know, and again, you know, this does, for me, I always walk a line, and it's not even completely as a Christian. It's just, you know, as just how I look at humanity and my own people. You know, you don't want to be complacent or you know just give people a break because they're like you. But what it says to me is that so many of us are still, you know, just struggling to pull ourselves out of the morass, you know, the quicksand of degeneracy, which has engulfed us for so long. And even these guys, you know, who are really going at it, you know, like Cantwell, as far as I know, that's what he does. That's all he does. You know, he's got his show. You know, even for these guys, you know, so I mean, what that says to me is, I mean, I want to be compassionate to these guys because I know how hard it can be. I've been there, and we've all been there. And you know, as Christians, we know that we're sinners. But but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not a smart enough man to know the answer to this, but I don't know what we're gonna be looking to do to start welcoming these guys, into a more Christian worldview, and make them see, how that has always informed, the best in European societies, and how that's always resonated with the best in the European soul.
Well, the problem is then you get a lot of them who are pulled off into stuff like Odinism and, neo-paganism, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I actually, okay, so
right-wing Wicca?
Yeah. So I get almost all of my blog post ideas either two places, which is either when I'm driving or when I'm in church, because that's where my mind is clear, right? So I was in church the other day and I got this idea for a post I think I'm going to call The Church of Burger King, because
have it your way.
Yeah, exactly. It's the have it your way, the customer is always right view of religion. And there's a lot of Christian churches that have fallen into that, much to the peril of both their church and their eternal souls. But also, neo-paganism is absolutely the most Church of Burger King religion out there. It's just another, none of these dudes actually believe it. I mean, like, there is nobody out there who literally thinks that there's a big guy with a beard and an eye patch and a huge hammer literally sitting in Valhalla, right? They've just come up with a religious belief that flatters them and agrees with their already existing worldview. And years ago, I ran across somebody who said, and I wish I could remember what the origin of this quote is, but he said, if you agree with your God about everything, take caution, you made him up.
Yeah, I've heard something similar. If you take what appeals to you in the scriptures and leave out what you don't, you're listening to yourself, not to God.
Well, the whole reason this neo-paganism exists among the white nationalists and all, it's nothing more than an attempt to spiritualize the fact that they worship their race. And so, they want to pick a religion and they got to go for a white one. So they go for, I guess, Odinism because, I don't know, Hercules doesn't have a cool comic book drawn by Jack Kirby. I don't know why they picked the Odinism exactly, but they just said, okay, that's a white religion. That's the white man's religion. I'm not going to worship some Jew on a stick. This is a white man's religion. And it's just a cover. It's just, a Band-Aid on the fact that, they don't want to just be full on a fedora, but it's just, they worship their race. They literally pick/make up a religion that appeals to their racial group.
Right. I mean, like I said in a comment on Facebook the other day, the difference is I actually believe Christianity is true, which means, the difference between me and some neo-pagan is I don't think so little of my own people that I think I have to lie to them to get them to do what I want them to do. And if you do, well, how pro-white are you really?
Well, here's let me run this by you guys. This is, something that's occurred to me at some point. This is just looking at it in a very, rough, unnuanced way. But, we went as European peoples, Western societies, we went from, setting up and structuring our societies around Christian principles. We went from that to, detaching from that a little bit, like it wasn't so explicit, and you get things like the Constitution, for example, or the French Revolution, which was horrific, but still, up until the last century, there was still a strong Christian ethos that kind of bound society together. Even if you weren't a practicing Christian, it was just something you were raised with. You saw it in your communities, and it did help, of course, that most of your community looked similar to you, spoke the same language, etc. But so we went from that to where it's just completely removed, and everything's secular. So what I'm getting at is that before we get back to the first sort of cultural climate that I was talking about, we will probably have to go through the second one again, which is these guys. And I'm not saying that it's okay to just give people this option, like act like a Christian even if you don't believe in Christ. That's not what I want. I want to fill up the pews. But I think these guys have to start seeing people who act like Christians and start understanding the pivotal role that's played in our culture, and then we'll get them. Hopefully, we'll get to a point where it has a more central role in society.
Well, the problem is that one of the things that sort of makes this group really, in a sense, leftist is it is very utopian. It is very, once our society is all white, then our problems will be over and nothing else will matter. And, to me, look, I'm a radical consequentialist. So when I get anyone on the left, any utopian, I say, okay, let's look at what happened when your ideas were implemented. Did what you say was going to happen, what you wanted to happen, did that actually happen or didn't it? Don't tell me about theories. Don't tell me about what should have happened. What actually happened? And, with the sort of neo-pagan white nationalists, it's like, okay, as our society got less and less Christian, did all the stuff happening around it become more to your liking or less to your liking? Well, and don't give me what should have happened. Give me what really happened. Don't give me theory. Give me actual facts. Because
go ahead.
All of this is not only testable, it has been tested.
The thing the white nationalists just absolutely refuse to accept, and I mean, just a few years ago, you'd have this argument with black folk that want to complain that the white man's keeping them down, when no one's keeping the black man down more than the black man. Well, likewise, no one's keeping the white man down more than the white man. Yeah, you can say the merchants are selling poison, but who's buying it? And, you could say there's all kinds of black on white crime, and that's true. But blacks are what, 10% of the population, 12, something like that? Most white nationalists live nowhere near them. That's not the problem. The problem is that to the extent the white race is dying, it's because it's committing suicide. These white nations are being flooded with third world savages because they're letting them in. All these other things. The white race went from the race that invented the airplane to the race that talks about, oh, look at this man, quote unquote, that had a baby.
Well, two important things have happened. The first being the removal of Christ from society, and in the second, and with that also comes hierarchy. Just the normal way, that we've always built our societies. But the second thing is despair. The despair that comes from that, and I agree. I don't blame everything on Zog. I do blame Zog for cynically recognizing what under normal circumstances would be strengths for our people, strengths for our society, and exploiting them against us. However, reaching that point of despair when, and we all know this as Christians, when you don't have the faith that sustained your grandfather, your great-grandfather, when he lost 2 of his kids, the farm was foreclosed on, whatever, that constant hope, that constant comfort, even in the darkest moments of loss and dejection. When these young guys, they don't have that. This is something, I've gone through some really difficult times in the last year and a half with illness and just other things, and having Christ, having Christ there and being able to turn to Christ, that's what's sustained me. And these guys don't have that. So that despair, what do they do with it? They, you can make memes, you can troll, so it's a tough time. It's a tough time, and we got to have, obviously we got to have compassion for these guys, and I don't know, again, I don't have the intellectual wherewithal to really formulate a good solid plan, but we're gonna have to figure out how to address that. Hey, LUE-YEE.
Did he leave?
Oh yeah, it looks like he
popped out.
Sorry. Go ahead, Antidem. Sorry.
For me, internet's having problems.
The heart of rightism is, let's go back to what we know works. There are things that we know work. And I'm sorry, after the 250 years that we've just had, I'm sick of clever people with innovative theories. We've had enough of those. Enough of them have blown up in our faces. Let's go back to what we know works. And look, one thing I learned long ago studying history is no restoration ever succeeds completely, nor should it. If you're restoring something, then something happened to make whatever it was break down to the point that it needs restoring. At very least, you should plug the leaks in it. You should figure out why it fell apart the first time and make sure it doesn't happen again. And also, circumstances change. There are things you've got to deal with now that you might not have had to in the past. But understanding that no restoration will ever succeed 100%, still, let's look at history and look at what's happened and say, we're going back to what we know works. And if you notice, by the way, one thing about the left, and this is, I think, something that's lurking in the background of wanting to tear down all these statues. Have you ever noticed how the left has not just a mental block, but I mean, like a serious, philosophical objection to learning from history? They really don't, because to them, they have this Whig history worldview where tomorrow, where you're on the right side of history or you're not. There's a line to it that goes up. Tomorrow will be better than today is. Today is better than yesterday is. So for them, of course, there's nothing to be learned from history. The people in history were racist, sexist, bigot, homophobe, retrogrades. Why would you ever want to learn anything from any of them? So, of course, tear down all the statues. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, no one from the past is good enough for the current year.
Yeah, the left has it's said a lot that they have a very kind of they don't really know history. It only goes back 50 or 60 or whatever years, and perhaps there's a problem also we're seeing with many on the right, or who claim to be on the right, is that they don't really have that concept of history either. And also, I think a lot of it is just, it's very, the right, it's very reactive. We're letting the left sets it sets the scene or what have you, and then they're just kind of I don't know, playing along, I guess, if that makes sense. Like there's no.
Well, I mean, the mainstream right.
Lost my train of thought.
Mainstream right, good old quote, conservatism Inc. And this is something I've thought for many years, has absolutely no coherent philosophy. They just have this sort of let's go back a little bit, good old days kind of thing. That you get a good old fashioned conservative down and try and just ask him what is the nature and purpose of government? What makes up a nation? And they can't give you anything. They certainly can't give you answers that are coherent with one another. Because all they are is just a reaction to the left. Now, there are other philosophies on the right that are actual philosophies, but the mainstream right isn't and never was.
That's because it's the left.
One thing that, it's refusal to take the ideas that we started out with in 1776 out to their logical conclusions. It's a way to say, okay, no, those aren't its logical conclusions, these are. But, I remember hearing someone once say that, you know, mainstream conservatism is the desire to have the world forever be what it was when you were 10 years old. and for me, you know, I was 10 years old in 1983. You know, hey, would I take a couple twists and turns aside? Would I take first term Reagan forever? Yeah, but I know it couldn't last. It, you know, that's what got us here. You can't just rewind a movie, start it over again, and hope that it'll end differently this time. That's not how reality works.
10 really was a good age. I remember I really liked being 10.
Well, one of the other things I know, and my buddy David Serini says this a lot about segments of the alt-right, where he argues that they missed the manosphere on the way there. And what he means by that is the manosphere, when it started out, was all about self-improvement. Yes, it was mostly focused on, you know, chasing women, but it was focused on improving yourself so that you could. And that's something that's missing from a lot of these white nationalist groups, is any sort of sense of self-improvement. I mean, any collective of any sort is made up of individuals, and, you know, will only be as strong as on average those individuals are. You need, there does come a point where you need to take a look at yourself and attempt to improve. I said on Twitter a while back that, you know, any white man with a wife and children who took his family to church Sunday morning did more good for his race than all the idiots with torches in Charlottesville.
Yeah, I mean,
but again, you know, the thing is, these guys who are doing stuff like, you know, the Charlottesville and the Pikesville events, these guys, again, in a normal, decent, functional European society, these guys wouldn't have to do this. You know, they'd be being led. They'd be being led by capable, virtuous men of means, men of education, men of, you know, men of letters, men of whatever, aristocracy, whether formal or informal. And this is why I think that we're kind of just in this, we're in a transitional state, you know, where these guys are, I think they're all craving that, you know, the same way that if you're a father or a teacher, or, you know, anyone that has to be in charge of someone, you kind of understand that people are looking for structure. People are, you know, as much as they're told that, you know, to indulge their individualism to a pathological degree, they're looking for structure. But when you're raised in a society where there is no structure, you know, your parents, you know, this guy that follows me on Twitter tweeted last week. He's a young guy. I think he's like 18 maybe. And he said, do you have any idea what it's like to be, you know, more developed morally than your own parents? You know, so that's what, you know, that's where these guys are coming from. And, you know, I'm you know, I don't know this for sure, but I'm hoping that this is just a transition that we have to help these guys get through. And there are certainly going to be some bumps in the road. You know, we're dealing with a very powerful machine. So I'm hoping that, you know, we can get them through that, because they are striving. You know, they're striving to, you know, to get out of Zog. They're striving to get out of the, frankly, you know, anti-dem, you and I are about the same age. They're striving in a way that I never thought I'd see in my life. So hopefully we can channel that. And we have, you know, Generation Zyklon coming up, and hopefully that will be channeled to a more classically, traditionally European society.
Well, you know, I almost wrote another blog post this week on Charlottesville, but it kind of decided not to. But the basic thrust of it was going to be, and sorry, this is really, really Catholic, because it's the whole, you know, yeah, we kind of need Aristotle too. The whole idea of the golden mean, right? I mean, the reason that I ended up sort of falling away from neo-reaction was it got too much into navel gazing. It turned too much inward. But on the other hand, if you take the opposite extreme, you see what we saw in Charlottesville. You know, we need a golden mean somewhere in between. You know, there were a couple of writers who quit. I mean, just dropped out, said, that's it. I'm folding up my blog. I'm ending my podcast. I'm going away in the wake of Charlottesville. And, you know, to me, again, you know, as Aristotle said, too much courage is recklessness. Too little courage is cowardice. And neither one of them is going to help. We saw recklessness in Charlottesville, and we saw cowardice from some people in the wake of it. And, you know, yeah, people do need self-improvement, but not so much self-improvement that they descend into navel-gazing. You know, you need both. And it seems like it's really, really hard for people to find that correct balance.
Well, you talk about the means, you know, the golden mean balance. I've argued on my channel time and time again, and I end up getting it from both sides, that the simple premise that race matters, but it's not all that matters. And that while generally I'd probably be happier in a white society, a mostly white society, I'll take a black church over a white bathhouse. And there's a lot of people on either side that just don't seem to grasp that.
Right. You know,
don't seem to grasp that I'm not an absolutist on race, but I acknowledge that it's an issue.
Right. You know, if you said, you know, I can strand you on a desert island with either Tommy Sotomayor or Movie Bob, you know, race is not going to be the deciding factor there. Yeah,
I've argued that before too. I said if in the unlikely event I'm in charge of colonizing another planet, I'm bringing Tommy Sotomayor before I'm bringing, you know, Movie Bob or Amazing Atheist.
So yeah, we need something better than we saw in Charlottesville, and we need better people for it. By the way, anyone who's out there, listen to me. Do not trust Andrew Anglin. Do not trust Weave. Just take my word for it.
I barely know anything about these guys.
I don't know Weave, but
I'm
my gut tells me
good
right.
too.
Yeah, you know, some middle-class white kid goes to jail for computer hacking, comes out with a swastika tattoo, and all of a sudden wants to insert himself into like every white nationalist movement that the FBI might be interested in. Yeah, don't think so.
I don't know. When I hear Weave talk, I have to conclude he's either a Fed or a psychopath.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know the guy. This could, you know, that's just my spider sense. I don't take it as gospel, but I don't ignore it either. You know, I was always uneasy with Richard Spencer right from the get-go. I was always uneasy with that Ghoul guy from TRS when I first saw him on a video. And I think time proved my gut instinct right on both of them.
Do you guys ever wonder what it's going to be like, you know, if we do get through this and we get like a very clear picture of at least most of what was always going on behind the scenes, especially as things, you know, came to a crescendo. You guys ever think about that? Like, it's just,
I think it's going to be more shocking and horrifying than most sane people.
Yeah, yeah, I do too.
I think guys like Alex Jones are going to turn out to be those guys in horror movies no one believed till it was too late.
Yeah.
I've been saying for years, the more of the world I see, the saner Alex Jones gets.
I mean, you know, just look at right before the election when it's like, oh, Alex, you're exaggerating. Look through the emails. Oh, Hillary worships the devil. How about that?
What do you know? The world really is run by a cabal of globalist satanic pedophiles. Who knew?
Alex knew.
Alex knew.
Yeah, I would have preferred the alien lizard men.
You know,
the aliens in They Live seem downright benign compared to what we have.
You know, at this point, Alex Jones has been right about so much that now I wouldn't be half surprised if fluoride really is turning the frogs gay.
Well, the thing there's, and I said this right after the Charlottesville, there's a certain spiritual dimension in it that you can't quite quantify there. You know, Cantwell's a good example. Cantwell's a guy who was going through some rough stuff. I was a big fan of him. I still like the guy. I still hope he turns himself around here. You know, he was going through some rough stuff, and he was kind of coming closer to God. And then instead he decided he was going to throw his lot in with guys like Spencer, guys like Weave, guys like the TRS guys. And as a result, right now, his life is destroyed. More so, now, Cantwell was always a guy that could get himself in trouble, but he never got himself in more trouble than after he threw his lot in with these guys. I mean, he was literally deplatformed from everything from YouTube to OkCupid. He was utterly destroyed in the aftermath of throwing his lot in with these guys. And, I mean, you know, what do you expect when you worship a cartoon frog?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just being people living very kind of, I guess, insular lives, you know, on the internet. A lot of LARPing, a lot of, you know, memes and that, and it just doesn't translate into the real world. And I think also a lot of people really believe that the alt-right and whatever, it had this huge impact on the election, and I'm skeptical of that. But I think people have really went to their heads.
Well, again, you know, our people, you know, Western people have never been this demoralized in such a fundamental way, you know, so thoroughly. Mm-hmm. And in my opinion, it's really, you know, it's almost miraculous, you know, that there's been any sort of headway towards, you know, going back at all. Because I didn't really see it coming. You know, even when this is something I think that kind of kept me as you know, kind of a normie conservative for a while, because I was for quite a while, because I really didn't see any signs. And then again, you know, I wasn't like privy to, you know, like things like Poll and even TRS. You know, like I didn't know about a lot of the stuff that was going on. I stumbled on Millennial Woes when he first started through kind of a circuitous route. Through I was listening to Michael Savage on YouTube, and I got suggested Australian Realist, and through him Ramsey Paul, and then Millennial Woes. So I mean, it is amazing that there's any pushback at all, and it's I think guys like us, you know, we might be inclined to get a little impatient. It's very difficult to, you know, not express the sense of urgency you feel, mm-hmm. Which is where our faith comes in. You know, we've got to pray, and especially for, you know, the Blessed Mother in you know, the apparition at Fatima, you know, made it clear, you know, I need you to pray for sinners, you know, sacrifice yourself for sinners. And that's, you know, that's what we have to rely on. And the more we do that, and the more we strive to be good Christians, the more our brothers and sisters will see that, and will take note that there's something different about us. And this opens the door to Christ for others, and someone did that for us at some point.
I think there's definitely a shift going in the right direction in culture, just in generally. Everyone seems to have moved a few steps rightward, and I mean, you know, you saw the earliest rumblings of this even with that Gamergate fiasco, where, yeah, but so much of that wasn't due to anything the right managed to do correct, so much as the left just perpetually overplaying its hand. Even in the wake of Charlottesville, I mean, that was a big win for the left all in all, and they managed to completely overplay their hand to the point where now no one's talking about Nazis normie-wise. They're talking about idiots are tearing down every statue that wanders in that they get in their field of vision. The biggest problem, I think, with so many of these guys on the right is they want to take the shortcuts. You know, they want to take the monkey's paw way of seemingly getting the society they imagine they want, and it's not going to pan out for them. You know, there's a lot of people in these movements that are A, feds, B, there for the wrong reasons, and then there's a lot of just dark spiritual elements at play there that would love nothing more than to sabotage it. You know, there are dark spiritual elements at play that don't want the white man to get back to Christendom. They want us to go, you know, paint our penises blue and dance in the woods with Jack Donovan.
All right, there's someone in the chat who said something, and I've got to address this. It's someone who's sort of giving in to despair and saying, I don't think we'll ever reconvert society. Let me ask you guys, let's see if you know this. Do you remember the one thing that God ever really, really, really smote King David for?
It was despair.
Well, okay, it wasn't the whole thing with Bathsheba. I mean, God didn't like it, but what he really smote David for was holding a census.
Oh, okay.
And, you know, one thing that sort of struck me, because I've been quote unquote reading the Bible on audiobook. That's my project for the whole year. There's a really, really good audiobook, you know, speaking of racial matters, called The Bible Experience. It's all a cast of black actors, but it's really good. Something struck me going through the Old Testament. I'm at Jeremiah right now, and we'll get back to that. It seemed to me going through it that I couldn't quite understand why God punished certain things very, very harshly that to me did not seem like very big deals, and did not punish other things that did seem to me like much bigger deals. And, you know, when you find yourself not knowing what God's up to, you know, you're the one who has to go away and sort of meditate and pray on it for a while. And I finally came to this, which is what God really punished. You know, God understands we are human beings. We have the temptations towards sexual improprieties, towards the pleasures of the plate and the cup, all of that kind of stuff. God doesn't like the fact that we commit those kinds of sins, but those are relatively, you know, okay, go confess to them or whatever it is you do if you're one of those heathen Protestants. What he really, really punishes is, especially in those in whom he trusts a lot, that he gives a lot of responsibility to, is breaking faith, is not trusting God when God says, trust me, is not following rules, you know, like, you know, he's the two sons of Aaron, who he smote with fire, right? Well, those guys were just going to light some incense that weren't a part of the ceremony. Why punish them with that just for lighting a little unauthorized incense? Well, no, it's not lighting incense per se that's the sin. It's these guys were sort of trying to hog the limelight, to take the glory away from God and put it onto themselves. When he smites with lightning, the guy who touches the Ark of the Covenant when he shouldn't have. Well, hey, wait a second. That guy knew that only the Levites were supposed to do that, and he didn't. And same thing with David. Like, I told you, you know, God says to David, basically, I told you, trust in me, I will get you through this. But what God does, what David does is to say, well, I'll tell you what, why don't we count how many able-bodied warriors we've got in Israel anyway? And God smote him for that, saying, look, you know, it doesn't matter how many able-bodied archers you've got. I told you I will get you through this. So at a certain point, you know, you're either going to trust that God's going to get us through this, or you're going to not. So yeah, it doesn't look possible, but if, you know, God specializes in making the impossible possible.
Yeah, anything is possible with God. And Christ even gave us, you know, an affirmation of that, you know, he promised he would be with us till the end of time. And I feel like I say this every Hangout, but I mean, always feel that. You know, there's, as long as two or more of us gather together in his name, he's going to be there with us. And you know, in the worldly sense, that's like, you know, that may lead you to despair. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, great, there are just two of us left. But you have to have hope. You have to continue to have hope.
Well, it's that faith, which is why you don't have to, you know, why you don't have to worship your race. You don't have to put everything in that basket. You don't have to try and take the shortcuts to get back where you need to be. You know, you don't have to worship your race because you have something bigger than that.
Now, that said, like I said, I've been going through the book of Jeremiah, and Jeremiah ought to scare the snot out of every single person in this country. Because, you know, one of the things you hear from mainstream conservatives a lot is, you know, well, God's on our side. God loves America. We're this special shining city on the hill. Well, you know what? God has before and will, you know, the Old Testament is filled with times when God decided that his chosen people had gotten just a little bit too haughty and needed to be taken down a few pegs. And if you read Jeremiah, it sounds like something somebody could have said today. You know, it's not this dusty old thing from thousands of years ago. All those words that Jeremiah is saying and that he's bringing from God about the sins of Judah and how they were going to get taken down a few pegs, every single one of them sounds like they could have been spoken today. And if you haven't read it in a while, go back and read it, and you're going to be scared snotless.
Well, like any good father, God disciplines his own more off, you know, sometimes harsher than the lost. So if you really are a normie conservative and you believe America's special in God's eyes and it's supposed to be that shining city on the hill, you should, if anything, be more frightened.
Yeah, you know, I read the book of Jeremiah all week, and then today I went out to the shooting range and started getting even better with my Mini 14. Because
well, that's the thing. I have no doubt of how things are going to ultimately pan out. The only difference is how painful it's going to be in the short term.
Right.
You know, I mean, I'm something of a geek myself. I'm something of a nerd, and I've noticed a lot of things I've enjoyed in pop culture have been just absolutely ruined in the last few years. A lot of things everybody enjoys in pop culture. I mean, you can't even watch a football game without it being full of Black Lives Matter stuff, to the point where nobody wants anything to do with it anymore. You know, Hollywood's hemorrhaging money right now. And part of me, I just kind of sat back for a moment and said, you know, maybe that kind of thing is happening because the good Lord has decided to take our toys away until we clean up our room. You know, as bad as things are here in the West, we still have things amazingly good, both at the world at large today, and particularly if you keep in mind history. You know, objectively speaking, as a lower middle class guy, I pretty much live better than a king did several hundred years ago.
Well, and like you said, BECHTLOFF, you know, or it might have been Antidem, I apologize. But we already know what works. And speaking for myself, and I don't say this boastfully because it took a long time and I've had help with it. I'm pretty much completely, at this point, completely disconnected from Zog. You know, I don't watch any TV. I've actually been rewatching Twin Peaks for the sake of nostalgia on Amazon.
Oh, you know what? I have too.
Yeah, yeah. I heard Reactionary Expat mention it in a recent Hangout. But you know, the last sport I was really into was hockey. I stopped watching that. I'm just not a part of it. You know, I look forward to falling asleep by 8. You know, getting up at 4 with my dog, and you know, going out in the woods and watching the sun come up. And, you know, and I'm not trying to paint myself as this, you know, avuncular, you know, pastoral throwback, you know, but this is just stuff that we used to, you know, not even that long ago, you know, maybe our grandparents, great-grandparents, it just used to be a normal kind of Christian European sort of lifestyle, you know, just you know, you don't need to be plugged into, distraction all the time. So it is there, we already know it works. And the more of us that do that, I think the better, even if you're just chatting with someone about it, and maybe it'll strike them. Maybe they'll say, wow, that actually sounds kind of cool. I do some, excuse my language, I do some shit posting on Twitter. I just don't know how else to term that. That's why I use the vulgarity. But my favorite thing is, just putting up a photo of my dog, when we're hiking, because I'm hoping that resonates with some people. Like, yeah, that's just a normal thing that we used to do.
Yeah, in the past few weeks, I've sort of, rediscovered the art of cooking your meals, and just simple stuff like that is how, I talked about self-improvement, and that's what I meant. Just simple things like that. The people out there in society that have your head on straight. I mean, if you just focus on building real relationships with your fellow man and making a family, and yes, making a few bucks if you can, because part of what builds up a nation is wealth, and wealth is built up by actually building up wealth, not with debt. Just doing basic stuff like that. Hit the gym once in a while, that kind of crap. I mean, just get yourself in line as best you can. Even just rediscover. Past couple of months, I made it an absolute, unless I absolutely have to get out the door at a certain time, every morning I start the day off just making my bed. And it seems like a small, pointless thing because, you're just going to get in it later, but it has positive psychological effects on you. Yep.
Just a matter of just having a life that has some structure in it. And if you want to know what is best for us, all you have to do is look at, what we're discouraged from doing. We're discouraged from, being, heterosexual, starting a family, spending family time together. It's to the extent that white people are actually, two parents, if they are even married and in the same house, they generally, unless they're, unless they have graduate degrees or have a highly marketable skill, they're both working, and they can't afford to have a lot of kids. They're subsidizing other people who won't work and who are having a lot of kids, and these are all the things that that we should be doing, that we used to do, and they're simple little things. And that that making your bed that you're talking about. I praying the rosary every day. Just this. It's when you start thinking about it, it's kind of daunting, but it's something. It's not just. It's important for me spiritually, and I've learned a lot about my faith through the rosary over the years. But it's also just a nice. It's a routine. And routine is good. I mean, yeah, it's fun to do something exciting once in a while, but it's not to the extent that we're encouraged these days in our society.
Well, I mean, if everything's exciting, then nothing is exciting. That's the problem with encouraging it to that extent.
Yeah. You get desensitized, and you just have to seek out more, outrageous and stuff that's more stimulating. It's unhealthy.
Well, and part of what was lost is, I'm kind of a old millennial, young Gen Xer, depending on where you draw the line exactly. But I feel like kids of my age, nobody explained to us why those basic things were important. Something like making your bed and how it just has a positive psychological effect on you.
Yeah.
Somebody just says, make your bed, and, you just feel like that's some arbitrary, who cares? Nobody else is going to see it, and I'm going to get in it that night anyways. Nobody took the time to actually explain why something worked better, because I don't know, perhaps I guess the boomers didn't know themselves.
And that's where these guys are.
Broken window theory.
Well, you have a whole generation or two of people who are disconnected from the traditional wisdom of their people, but not just like in, oh, let's go read a philosophy book or something like that. I mean, just the traditional folk wisdom of stuff that your grandma used to tell you, you know, and they're all rediscovering it. Like the whole thing about Richard Spencer and over Missing the Manosphere is like, we have 2 generations of young men who never had anyone teach them how to be a man.
That's why we need to be patient with them. You know, I mean, I'm not saying that you get complacent and you say, oh, it's okay. You know, you look the other way, but they need, you know, you know, we're talking about, you know, what a lot of these guys missed out on, you know, just someone older and who's been through that and has found a better way. You know, they need that guy, you know, to be patient. And you know, like St. Paul says, you know, you point out to your brother if he's in error. I mean, granted, these guys aren't already Christians we're talking about, but you know, we can't alienate these guys, you know, after they've, you know, realized how alienated they are in their own society, and they find something that they think, okay, yeah, this might be constructive. This seems like, you know, something that it seems like a remedy. I think we need to be careful not to alienate them within this. You know, again, not say it's okay to, you know, just, you know, hold on to, you know, vestigial degeneracy or whatever, but we need to be good Christians. We need to be.
When you're dealing with somebody who considers himself a leader, there has to be a certain level of accountability. And I mean, specifically with somebody like
I'm just talking about rank and file. I'm not really.
Well, no, rank and file, yeah, but with
I'm not talking about
even with the people that consider themselves a leader at a certain point. I mean, you know, the whole idea of race realism is supposed to be pattern recognition, right? Well, at a certain point, you just say, hey, you know, everything you touch seems to turn to crap here, so maybe you should be doing something else. Regardless of, and you should, for your own personal sake, don't ignore your gut with these people. I've known friends involved in these online stuff that have ignored their red flags to their peril. But yeah, when it comes to the just average rank and file, no, I'm not saying you beat them over the head with it. That's the wrong way to go about it. But you know, when you got to tell them, like, hey, there's more important things than your people, even. You know, there's things even that transcend that. I remember Arini talking to the guy that used to do the Uncuck the Right videos, the little Disney parodies, and he's trying in vain to explain to this kid that there may indeed be in the world moral imperatives greater than loyalty to your race, and he was having none of it. But kudos to David for being patient, Davis, and being patient and trying to explain it to him.
Right. I just want continue on that. I think a lot of nationalists have too much of a parochial view. Like, they don't see the bigger universal picture, which comes from having a theological, metaphysical view, a religious view.
By the way, BECHTLOFF, before we get too far away from this topic, I think talking about degeneracy and how it's sort of never enough, sort of the whole thing about how you have been saying that the Hellraiser movies may be some of the greatest Christian movies ever made. Oh yeah, I'm a big fan of horror movies and have been for a while. One of my earliest roommate turned me on to them. But the Hellraiser movies, while many of them are not the best movies, they have a lot of interesting theological depth when it comes to issues of temptation and sin. The basic premise is there's this mystical box that hedonists are drawn towards that promises them pleasure beyond their wildest dreams, and if they open the puzzle box, these like weird S&M demons come out and drag them to hell. And I've often used the Hellraiser box as just the analogy for people who fall down this hedonistic trap to the point where, you know, they've lost all semblance of reality.
Yeah. That's why, like, being a prostitute is one of the most dangerous jobs out there, because men have, like, really opened up the hedonistic box where, like, it's not even enough to have sex with a pretty woman with a warm body anymore. You have to do, like, or creepier, violent, statistic things.
Well, even people that use, you know, I talked about this with Commonfelt and all, but you know, people that would be into some off the wall kinky things and all, it used to be just something they were into in the bedroom, and now you see people will role play as this thing 24/7. You see, you know, at the gay pride parade, you see the guys just constantly dressed up like dogs and something like that, because it's just become their life.
Yeah,
it's not just celebrated, but it's insisted that you celebrate it too.
It's absolutely something that's consumed them.
Yeah, but it's sort of like, that's sort of like more of a homosexual tendency to do that, because homosexuals base their entire identity around their sexual practices.
It is, and I've often said that. You know, that, I mean, there's more, because there's just more heterosexuals. There are more heterosexuals into weird S&M stuff, and they just generally keep it in the bedroom. But even that's going away. I mean, you see these, you know, you see these stories propped up in the news about somebody that lives as a baby all the time, or some idiotic thing like that, and it's a heterosexual couple. It's reached the point where it's just seeped into that. It just, because it's never enough. It's never enough. You always need a greater high. You always, especially if you have no other anchor. I mean, if sex is all you have to live for, you're gonna have to up the ante constantly.
Yeah, but it's also like there's this homosexualization of the heterosexuals in America, where like their tendency becomes more and more homosexual in their lifestyle. Like they just have a lot of unreproductive sex using condoms and the pill. And like there's no child rearing or anything like that. There's a heavy reliance on contraception, and there's no commitment. There's all this promiscuity. This is like, and it's also like now, like it's people are having sex without dating or any type of courtship whatsoever. It's getting so crazy right now.
Yeah, you're saying.
I mean, basically, Tinder is Grindr for straight people.
Yeah, exactly. That's the whole thing. You know, if like, and another pet peeve that I have is that like a lot of these manosphere blogs that cry out against sexual degeneracy also promote PUA shit, which is like pretty much encouraging men to take part in the modern degeneracy, like pretty much become a male version of a thought.
Well, I mean, in all fairness, the art of learning how to pick up a woman, that isn't immoral so much as it's amoral. That's a tool. I mean, no, understanding how to talk to women, how to approach women, that's just as easily something you can use to find yourself a wife as it is to find yourself a one-night stand. I mean, if you have no concept of how to talk to women, you're not likely to end up with a wife and a family.
Yeah, I get that.
I mean, so I'm not going to say that, you know, it's obviously not something a lot of guys are just using to get laid, but it's a tool. It's not immoral, it's amoral. It is whatever it is applied towards. I mean, I can build a shed with a hammer, or I can bash a man's skull in. It doesn't make the hammer evil.
Right.
Well, you know, you've got guys like Roosh who, you know, had a very degenerate past, but have slowly gotten better and better and better. You know, there's a lot of people sort of in this end of the right that have, you know, checkered pasts, especially with sexuality. You know, Arini has had his, and you know, he doesn't talk about it much, but it's sort of around if you look for it. Roosh had his, but the idea.
Yeah, I mean, I was saved as a young man. I'm hardly pure as the driven snow myself.
Yeah, the idea is you keep working towards something better.
Well, I mean, you kind of hit on it earlier when you were talking about, you know, the types of sins God takes more seriously. I mean, in the New Testament, you know, there's one time Christ is angered to the point of physical violence, and it's not in the bordello, it's not in the Apollo temple where the guys are all having gay sex. It's in the temple, You know, it's in the money changers in the temple. I mean, there does kind of come a point where, you know, those are sort of the sins of men. And then when you get into things more like pride and you know, really just thinking you don't need God and that sort of thing, you're almost entering into the sins of demons.
Yeah, you know, God doesn't like us to engage in sins of the flesh, but you know, Christ was here on earth. He felt what temptation was like. Okay, you know, again, go make your peace with God with that however you want. But, you know, there is stuff that will make God really, really, really mad.
And you actually are, I mean, in a spiritual sense, you are doing violence to Christ when you are deliberately engaging in sin. And you know, and you can even, you know, not to get too metaphysical, esoteric, whatever about it, you know, you can increase or attenuate his suffering on Calvary, you know, and you know, in the Garden of Gethsemane, you know, it's when you begin. This is part of what I love about the Rosary, is when you begin to meditate on exactly, you know, why did he die? Why did he come here? You know, and you know, what are, you know, all of the dimensions and you know, and the depth of these dimensions, you know, surrounding what he did, you know, what he sacrificed. And these are things that if you can begin to think about them and begin to understand them, you can begin to integrate them into not just your thoughts, but your habits. And this is, I'm not saying I'm there yet, but this is when you begin transforming yourself in Christ. And going back to what we were originally talking about, you know, this is what we have to hope and pray for, that we're going to be able to offer a lot of these guys. You know, because a lot of these guys coming out of Charlottesville, or even guys that weren't there but just saw it, these guys are going to be really demoralized, and they don't have anything to do with that. You know, the video that one of the videos that Millennial Woes did today, you know, where he really he touched on, you know, how a lot of guys, I think he was tying it to just K-type guys. You know, they're just like, you know, kind of nonplussed right now. You know, it's like, I did everything right. You know, I'm responsible. I pay my taxes. I'm not breaking the law. And you know, these guys eventually, hopefully, you know, need to understand what it means to give that to Christ. You know, invest that in Christ. You know, all suffering, because when you start doing these things, when you start understanding these things, then you really become effective at not just being a better person, but being a stronger part of your community.
And another thing, like you touched on, Lumen, how a lot of these guys are good, honorable K-type guys, you know, who do all the right things. Like they work on the job, like they don't waste their boss's time. They pay their taxes, like they do everything right, but still they suffer in this country, because I think it's not just like with the Charlottesville guys. I think there are a lot of good guys out there suffering, because these are guys who would have done well in the old school America. That was a high trust society. That was a society that's based on integrity and honor. Yet we don't live in that type of society anymore.
Well, you know, one of the things that will drive you towards our end of things is the realization they will never leave you alone anywhere. You know, someone handed me a study out of some journal a few months ago that was like, you know, patriarchy and the gender dynamics of skate parks. I'm like, okay, if it's gotten to the point,
that's hilarious. Wow. Yeah, That's really out there. That's like really cuckoo, cat lady stuff right there.
That's how that Gamergate thing started a few years ago. So many males had been so demoralized and so even marginalized in society that all they had was their hobby, and they weren't even allowed that. And there is a point to where that is gonna wake a lot of people up, perhaps even more than demoralize them. At a certain point, it's like, enough's enough. I have nowhere to fall back to, and that's, if you so much as corner a squirrel, it turns into one of the most dangerous things on the planet. Let alone when you corner a God-fearing K-type man.
Yep. And they need to, again, the one of the innate parts of European societies and Christianity was a link of continuity between the dead, the living, and the unborn. And this really, it was just the lifeblood of who we were. And, even going back, to pagan days, just knowing what your ancestors accomplished, how you had a duty to that and how you had to hand that down to your son. And this has been, this link has been broken by design, of course. And, that's why so many of these guys, and again, I'm talking about just your average guy, not leaders, even those guys, some of them I do believe are artless. They think they're doing the right thing because, and this is why, that link has been broken. You can't look to your father. In many cases, you can't look to your grandfather. You can read, you can, you can get a sense of how things were, but there's just a big difference when it's just something that you were raised with, every day of your life, and that's gone right now, and that's what we're looking to rebuild. And these guys that are purely secular, they will eventually be looking for that. If I told you guys I was an atheist, and if I was looking for it, when I was still completely paused, and I mean, I had a pretty good idea for a long time that something was wrong, something was awry. But if someone like me, was looking for it and could eventually, through just kind of reaching out, like, hey, are you there, God? And, reading C.S. Lewis and, meeting a good, decent, traditional Catholic woman, if someone like me could get there, I think a lot of these guys who are already, kind of down that road, bucking against modernism, disgusted with the pause, and we need to hold out hope for that, because that's our future. That's in the worldly sense and the spiritual sense in some ways.
One of the things I would think would really help is if we, and it sounds almost materialistic, but restoring in young men a respect and even pursuit of the basic trades. I mean,
yeah.
My generation was sold this bill of goods. No, you don't want to go be an electrician or a plumber. You want some soul crushing office job with tons of student loan debt. As long as there is a civilization, the toilets need to run and the lights need to be on, and periodically we need to slap a few pieces of metal together. Those are kind of the foundational jobs, and they've just been sort of abandoned.
And it's good for the soul too. When you're told, like, whatever, you can be anything you want, go to college, and you realize you can't. That contorts or ruins the peace of the soul.
And doing honest work and building up real wealth that's how you build a civilization. Us Christians like to always say that man doesn't live by bread alone, but he also doesn't live without it. And you don't have a civilization if you don't keep things running.
Yeah, and most of the purchases in our economy, they're all based on credit. And that's another thing that we need to get away from, because you could pretty much get any lifestyle you want at just a swipe of a card, regardless of whether or not you're able to pay it off in the end. And that's a sad thing.
Yeah, by and large, just as a general rule, and I realize there's always emergencies that can pop up here and there, but you know, never go into debt for pretty much anything but you know, a roof over your head and a car. You know, those are just pretty much the basic things you need. At least where I live, I mean, if you don't have a car, you're essentially under house arrest.
Oh, come on. A lot of people around there have a horse and buggy.
Well, yeah. That's a whole different topic.
Oh, yeah. The Amish.
But, yeah, you know, that's it. That's the only things that you should go in debt for, by and large. Other than that, I mean, you know, it's good to have a credit card for emergencies, but that should be what it's for, you know.
By the way, someone a while back brought up how many of the new European leaders you have now are childless, and it's like pretty much all of them in Western Europe.
I think it actually is literally all of them, if I remember correctly. I think it is. I think it's and you know, again, you know, that link that we used to have, you know, between, you know, the living, the dead, and the unborn. There's how can you have a stake?
I wonder how many of them even have nieces and nephews. I mean,
or even a
I bet
cat, just a cat. You know, it's like anything. You know.
Yeah, I mean, do any of them even have a puppy? You know.
Like, if you
I'm
look
pretty
at
sure any dog or cat would immediately hiss at Margaret or at
Merkel. Yep.
Merkel, yeah, Merkel. Just, you know, those animals can sense evil, so I'm pretty sure they wouldn't.
That instinct would come in.
Yeah. So I guess that's why, like, cat ladies become cat ladies instead of dog ladies.
I'm very much against it. I mean, women, if no man wanted you, don't subject yourself onto a poor innocent kitten.
Well, the kitten doesn't even notice you to begin with.
Yeah, we actually covered the DQ, the dog question, and I think it was the last hangout. You know, the difference.
Yeah, it was. I was just listening to it a couple of days ago.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really.
Shot really doesn't like cats.
I don't either. You know, I mean, it's not that I dislike them, but I don't want one. You know, I mean, it's, you know, I have fun with my dog, and I'm engaged with my dog. You know, I watched my dog chase 2 coyotes off yesterday, and you know, and come over and say, "Hey, did you see that?" I mean, you know, not literally, or maybe she did. Who knows? But yeah, I mean, it's just a more of an engaging animal. It's the one animal that's really kind of evolved to seriously live with us. You know, and it shows, which I think is why, you know, cat ladies have cats. I'm sorry, I brought up the DQ again. I'm just forget it.
Further DQ.
So, are you saying that, like, cats relate to soulless, selfish people like themselves?
Yes, and they look forward to them as a meal.
The cat question.
I like kitties. They're cute.
Yeah, just, you know, I don't really even need to go beyond the fact that they go to the bathroom in the house. I mean, that's it. That's all I need. You know, nope. You know.
So do we.
Yeah, but I generally, as far as I can remember, I don't usually do it like in a box that sits there and yeah.
Okay, but the issue is not it being in the house. It's it being in a box.
All right, we're getting autistic here.
Sorry, Britain. But he was commenting how he likes it better when there's not a bunch of spurgs in it. But I don't think that happens too often. But
so yeah. Anyway, you know, these guys, you know, coming off of you know, not just the guys that were there, and you know, the apotheosis of this really is that poor guy who was in the car, you know, and you know, speaking of cat ladies, ran over the cat lady, and you know, there's just not a better illustration, you know, of the madness and you know, the sobering realization, you know, that you're in a society that is essentially and almost explicitly, you know, at this point, dedicated to your destruction, you know, body, mind, and soul. And these guys, I'm hoping that we'll be able to reach out to a lot of them and help them to rediscover, you know, what their forebears knew and took for granted, you know, and the whole crazy thing about the alt-right and nationalism is the only reason it's necessary is because we got to this point. You know, it's like if you talk to, you know, Germans, you know, 100 years ago, they weren't really thinking about nationalism. You know, it's like, why? You know, we're all Germans. Yeah, it's so. We're just in such a crazy nihilistic sick state right now.
Right. Yeah. At the risk of just, you know, repeating what others have said, it's going to be a long and bumpy road, and for a lot of us, especially who are younger, you know, it's a totally new learning curve, right? You know, just having grown up in such a, I guess, a chaotic
absolutely,
society,
absolutely.
Say, you know, with lack of hierarchy and discipline and whatever else. I mean, yeah, it's going to take a while.
Is your internet all right, Tom?
Am I breaking up or something?
Yeah, it's a little crackly.
Ouch.
It happens to me all the time.
Yeah.
You know, it's just
any better.
No, it's just the Amish out shaking BECHTLOFF's wires.
Yep.
Got to get rid of the demon internet.
Yeah. Who are worse, the Amish or the Luddites?
The Amish. Yeah.
How?
Oh man, I could spend an hour complaining about
Well,
the Amish.
do the Luddites use buttons? Let me ask that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but how many buttons?
Do the Luddites routinely drown in pools of crap?
So,
wow.
So Chris, BECHTLOFF, let me ask you one question. Was the persecution of the Amish justified in Europe?
Yes. If they're anything like they are now, yes. I'll give you a perfect example of just recently of what happened in my area. Because the Amish are, my buddy Matt Forney always calls them Stone Age Jews. I call them pacifist Muslims, but they're very shady people when it comes to business dealings. There's a gun shop maybe 2 miles up from me that this old man, I mean in his 80s, he ran, and he sold the land to the Amish with the understanding that he could still remain open for a year to try and liquidate as much of his inventory as he could. Okay. Well, then a week after the deal was done, the Amish guy, who is now his landlord, comes in there and says, all right, I don't want you open on Sundays anymore, which I'm sure was annoying to him, but not a big deal. And you're not allowed to sell handguns anymore. So this old man just basically had to, I don't know what he did with this inventory, but that sneaky Amishman just screwed him over. And they do that all the time around here.
You mean that the Amishman stole his inventory?
No, he just made it so the guy couldn't liquidate it. I don't know what the guy's going to end up having to do with it now. He was going to remain open for a year to try and liquidate the inventory, and the new landlord put so many restrictions after the fact on him that he couldn't.
And I'm assuming both these guys are white, right?
Yep.
So this just shows, you know, these are two white guys. You know, I joke about, you know, like when I was growing up, like the main ethnic groups in my town were Irish and Italian, and you know, and there was strife. You know, it's not like we were brawling in the streets every day, but you know, and you know, we'd see each other at mass on Sundays. But you know, this is, you know, so
I mean, as much as
you know, competing groups,
as much as race matters, there's always going to be.
Well, this is my point. Even among white guys, you know, it gets like this. So how much more so, you know, to the average person, you know, when you have someone from Ethiopia, like a large group of people from Somalia, whatever. You know, it's just we already know this. We already know this from you know, our own history.
What was that Dr. Seuss book where like the one group had stars on their belly and the other didn't, and they wanted to kill each other?
I know which one you mean.
Like, I mean,
what it's called.
I mean, you know, yes, race matters and all, but you know, trust me, if we didn't have race as an excuse to hate each other, we'd find something else.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Part of our problem. You know,
and traditionally
racial issues matter, but they don't matter quite as much as mankind has always made them out to.
Yes.
We just like a good excuse to hate the other guy.
And traditionally, Europeans of different ethnic groups haven't always gotten along. Like, there's always strife. Like, for example, I've heard between Hungarians and Romanians, they really don't like each other. Gregory, who's, if you've been watching our channel, Gregory Carlin, he's a Romanian guy that comes on our channel from time to time. He once made a joke that if a Romanian saw a black guy and a white guy drowning, he would save the black guy because for sure he won't be Hungarian.
Well, I mean, look at how much the Chinese and the Japanese utterly despise each other. And to an untrained Western eye, I can barely tell them apart.
Yeah, you look at the rape of Nanking. You know, that was just like, yeah, that's like a horror movie. You know,
and I mean, they hate each other.
The Koreans have sort of a chip on their shoulder toward Japanese too. It's like they kind of, I mean, they're the country next door, and so they're kind of friends, but there's kind of like historical rivalry there. So I don't know. Like when I was in Korea, I remember Hugh Darvish, who's a Japanese pitcher. He was on the front page of MLB.com, and I asked this one kid, "Oh, you like Darvish?" He's like, "No, he's Japanese." So,
I mean, as much as the modern world likes to make it imagine, like, you know, white people invented racism in the 1950s or something, you know, I mean, just go up to a Pakistani man and call him Indian and see where that gets you.
Yeah, or vice versa. Everyone gets it except for us. I mean,
the first thing he'll ask is, "Do I look Indian?" To which I'm kind of like, "Yeah, I guess." I don't know.
Yeah, I had a friend in college who's Indian. He really hates Pakistanis.
It seems that like the whole platform of the left and DNC is just like we all hate white people. That's the only thing that unites us now, especially straight white males, Christian too. And it's kind of funny that like you go to cities in LA or New York and you see like these amalgamation is of all these different groups of like urbanites, like Asian urbanites, Black urbanites, and Hispanic urbanites, and they all have this like sense of superiority about not being white.
I mean, I hung around the black kids enough as a kid to know how much they would segregate each other based on exactly what shade of black they were.
Yeah. Like I heard that like the mulatto blacks, like the light-skinned blacks, will only hang out with light-skinned black doctors.
High yellow.
What is that?
That's the term is high yellow. You know.
High yellow. Okay, yeah.
I mean, the song "The Yellow Rose of Texas" is about a mulatto woman who spied for the Texans during the Texas Revolution against Mexico.
I think you just committed a hate crime.
Not my first, won't be my last.
You know, I was once in a university class with this black professor, and like he said like the most stupidest shit that, like, sorry if I can't use profanity on your channel, but like he was talking about like why do they call us African Americans if we didn't choose to be Americans, like that type of stuff.
I worked second shift blue collar, and I ended up working with a lot of African immigrants over the years, like black guys actually from Africa, and a lot of them, at least the ones that had jobs and all, they were just so happy to be here because it was just so much nicer than what they were used to. and they despised the American blacks, saw them as spoiled and entitled, and it was amazing. I mean, they just, and then I would see things where, you know, the blacks hated the Hispanics. You know, I remember this huge guy, I mean, monstrous. The guy, he was like the size of like Vin Haynes or like Michael Clark Duncan or something, walked into the break room one time and screamed at a bunch of Puerto Ricans, "Speak English, you know, mofos."
Yeah. Yeah, I once like got very angry at some Mexican kids back in middle school saying that you guys better speak English. And the teacher actually sided with them, saying that they don't have to speak English. Like, what do you mean they don't have to speak English? Which country are they in?
Oh, that's so utterly ridiculous. I mean, you know,
yeah,
there is no more basic and active assimilation than learning the language.
Yeah, exactly. In front of them? Jeez.
You know,
well, that's a primary signaling opportunity, and she's not going to pass that up. I mean, that's the end game. You know, where it's all you're looking for is opportunities to signal against yourself, your self-interest, and those of your kin.
But again, why
is it replaced religion?
Why is it white people above all other people feel the need to constantly prove they have no racial identity? They constantly prove that, oh, I don't see race and it doesn't matter and I'm not. It's because, you know, again, the white race has gone so godless that it doesn't have an identity anymore. I mean,
well, let's look at like what's the foundational myth of white society, white Western society. It's the Holocaust, and that's like their whole, like all like history starts for them at the Holocaust, and that pretty much determines their whole worldview, and it's based on like their entire worldview is based on death and destruction. It's a fear of death and destruction as opposed to like a love of life.
Well, it's also a, you know, we have a very strong reverence for individualism. We have a highly developed sense of altruism, which Christianity refined into charity, and we have you know, idealism, and we have a strong need for approval, and so all these things combined it's a perfect storm for those who want to undermine us. You know, these things work well enough in our own societies, especially, you know, once Christianity came around, but they're weaponized against us now, and to kind of seal the deal, if you notice that they've been weaponized against us, it's almost like a feedback loop that's used against you. It's like, you know, you're not going to get that approval, that social approval. You know, it's sick. It's really sick what's been done to us. And yes, you know, in many ways we have allowed it to be done to us, but not the average person, not the average white guy.
Yeah, and it's also like what you're getting at. It seems that nowadays you just have to do the right thing because it's the right thing, not necessarily because you'll get rewarded for it, which most likely you won't, especially the way this society is headed. It's less and less likely that you would get rewarded for doing the right thing.
Well, it's always been that way, but now there are much more dire consequences. Those consequences weren't there before. You know, it's like you would do it, it's the right thing. Maybe your neighbor, your wife sees it, but there wasn't this, you know, consequence of you're going to lose your job. You know, there you know, there's this competing group, you know, among you, and things have been upended.
Well, it's also like, I mean, there was once a time when we were more of a meritocracy, and I think that has changed since since more women have been pushed to get involved in the workforce.
Well, you know, from a Christian perspective, one thing that all of you have a duty, right? Anyone listening to the sound of my voice, go out and actually read the Bible. Because you will find so many things that are distorted in terms of, they're distorted by society and certainly by our enemies in terms of what your duties are. Like that whole thing about, you know, judge not lest ye be judged, and you got to forgive and all that. Well, it's like, no, actually, I don't have to go in and, you know, forgive the whole bathhouse, you know, or those guys parading down the street with a rainbow flag tattooed on their butt.
Because they're not repenting.
Right. Christian forgiveness is a process. First comes repentance, then comes atonement, and then only then comes forgiveness. You know, let's not forget, Christ said, if your brother sins 7 times, rebuke him 7 times. Whoa, what's going on there?
Yeah, it's also...
are you guys getting... I'm sorry.
Sam, there's like some air noise on your end.
Oh, is there? Let me...
So, you know, Christ said, if your brother sins 7 times, rebuke him 7 times. And if your brother repents 7 times, forgive him 7 times. Well, if you can't judge what's a sin and what isn't, then how are you going to do that? You can't rebuke someone until you understand that they have sinned, and you can't forgive someone until you understand that they've repented. And let's not forget, that's a two-way command. We are as much commanded to rebuke our brother for sinning as we are to forgive him when he repents.
And this is love. This is real love, because this is what brings you closer to God. You know, and it's a tragedy. It's a heinous crime. You know, that's been perverted. You know, that, you know, Jesus is a socialist. You know, Jesus loves sodomy. You know, it's. I don't want to get triggered, so I'm going to leave it at that.
It's another thing is like, it seems that like for some people reading the Bible is not enough, because like you have these highly intelligent white people who are leftists who are very good at finding mental and hermeneutical gymnastics in order to make the Bible say the exact opposite of what it says, especially the Christian feminists that are in many parts of the church, especially within the evangelical church. I mean, they've like that's a problem. Like Chris touched on this problem before, like how like the evangelical church is not addressing its feminist problem, and it's a topic I talk about all the time with my friend Greg. You know? Oh
yeah, most like, definitely. They well, part of the reason I think it happened is just because the parachurch ministries, the sort of media empires that popped up in conservative Protestantism, just by the nature of what they do, they ended up having a mostly housewife audience, which sort of gave them a feedback loop of, you know, ending up talking to your audience primarily. But that doesn't excuse it. That's just kind of diagnosing what helped cause it. But
yeah, yes, and it's also like there's also like groups like the Campus Crusade and like and InterVarsity, which fall under like the category of para ministry groups, that like it's all these groups are full of young college girls that lean politically to the left. Like they at least are compromising on social justice, even if they don't go all the way in their compromise and embrace gay marriage. But it's pretty much like those groups like are headed in that direction, or have been headed in that direction. Or I mean, I don't follow them, but I wouldn't be surprised if they already headed in that direction. Like they went all the way.
In the same way you could call a guy like Spencer just a racist leftist. There's large swaths of Churchianity which you could just call pro-choice leftists, or pro-life leftists. I meant to say. I apologize.
Yeah, that's I mean, most of the pro-life
I just today I got in an argument with the old cat lady that is the moderator at this site called Breakpoint because, I dared to suggest that maybe there's a reason those guys in Charlottesville are angry.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm called a white supremacist for it.
White supremacist.
And even when you have the quote unquote alpha males in the church, you end up with some guy like, Mark Driscoll, who's just this paper alpha. Who,
oh my God! Like, don't even get me started.
Your wife is always right, and if you as a man have a hobby, you're wrong.
All I remember from Mark Driscoll is that like he was talking about like oral and anal sex. That's the only thing I remember about him. Is it okay to have anal sex with your wife, or like I remember him getting stuff like that from his audience. Like he had kind of like an instant message thing going on. Like,
I mean, you look at some of the church leaders. Like those of you playing at home, Google a guy named John Stonestreet and look at this guy. And I mean, this is one of the most soy mofos you're ever going to see. You get little effeminate weasels like James Dobson and all running the show.
And Russell Moore.
Russell Moore, that's Eric Metaxas, another good example. I mean, these are Richard Spencer types. Okay, they're just effeminate closet cases, and enough's enough with them.
Yeah, and another one is John Piper. Have you heard of him? Like how he once said that like if somebody broke into his house, he would give them a gospel track.
I have not heard of him.
Like he's very anti-gun.
I'd give him a gospel track too, as I was holding them at gunpoint, waiting for the cops to show up. Here, read this. We got a few minutes.
As he's bleeding out. There you go.
Give him Psalm 50.
Right. I wonder what
as he's bleeding out, you throw him a Bible and say, I suggest starting at John.
Read fast.
Well, or how about just give them the Ray Comfort elevator pitch?
I was thinking a chick tract myself.
What's really interesting though is that within evangelical culture there is a sharp disconnect between the rank and file and the self-professed leaders of it as a movement, I guess. When you get into more local churches that aren't tied to them, you tend to have actual men as preachers. The rank and file are some of the most gun-toting, God-fearing K-types you can come across. And, a good example of this is I remember back in the 2012 election cycle, they had something called the Values Voter Summit, which is where a bunch of evangelicals get together and they have their own straw poll on which Republican guy they want. And I think they vote on the Democrats too, but no one cares. And by and large, they voted for Ron Paul back in 2012. And you would think maybe a guy like Santorum would have been second place, but no, it was actually Herman Cain, who was sort of Ron Paul light or Ron Paul dark, if you want to make the joke.
Yeah.
And then a couple months later, a bunch of the leaders of evangelical culture got together for their own little powwow, and Ron Paul was dead last, and they voted almost unanimously for Rick Santorum in their little straw poll. Which just shows you a sort of disconnect between the leadership and, the rank and file. The rank and file were attracted towards Ron Paul because he was talking about real things. We need to edit the Fed. We need to have a better foreign policy. Whether you agree with him or not, he had something that salt of the earth people could identify with more. Whereas Rick Santorum's platform was nothing but abortion and supporting Israel.
Right. I mean, Rick Santorum's a great guy. I like him, but he's like a little bit off balance as far as his policy focuses. Well,
I mean, I often wonder if abortion was outlawed, what would Rick Santorum do with his time?
Well, he'd probably find...
even the next day you'd find out Rick Santorum killed himself because he no longer thought he had a purpose.
Well, actually, he probably next would be trying to outlaw fornication. And after that, swearing and, it's like he's pretty puritanical for a Catholic. Like Catholics from what I've seen aren't usually that puritanical.
I bet he still goes to Novus Ordo Mass though.
Yeah, probably.
I would almost be ready to actually bet on that, and I'm not a betting man.
Yeah, well, maybe he would be trying to outlaw the Latin Mass after we get rid of abortion, and probably trying to like get like the priests to wear like suits and ties.
Sam, what's all the noise on your end? I keep hearing all these like air noises. Is there something blowing on your microphone that you're breathing, or?
No, I don't hear anything. Sorry about. Do you still hear it?
Not at the moment, but while you're talking, you keep these noises like.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah.
It sounds like something's like rubbing up against your microphone, maybe.
No, I'm just breathing, exhaling. I think that's it.
Okay.
It's also like continue on that topic. It's pretty much the perfect stereotype of the Christian man in America is Ned Flanders. Like, hi neighborino, Homer, are you going to church today? Like it's like every man is expected to be Ned Flanders within evangelical Christianity. It's like there's this aversion to anger.
Well, I would say that where the disconnect is the leadership that represents them on the national stage is Ned Flanders, whereas I think the rank and file is a lot more Johnny Cash.
Yeah, you're probably right, but I've seen a couple Ned Flanders, at least when I go to churches in California.
Well, you know, there is the old thing that someone said back during the election about the Mormons, about how they too frequently confuse being polite with being good. And, you know,
I think white people in general do that.
The one guy on my live stream, a sidekick that isn't there anymore, he said that during the Trump administration, or the Trump during the election, talking about Trump, he talked about all the evangelical leaders that were clutching their pearls about, you know, Trump likes vagina and stuff like that. And he said they confuse manners with morality.
Well, what would they have rather wanted Trump to like? Penises?
Well, I mean, you know,
maybe they're angry that he's a heterosexual man and he's honest about his heterosexuality.
Well, you know, some of these evangelical leaders, I mean, you look at them and you're like, I don't know if this guy exists from the waist down.
Well, it's not just that. I think it's because I think most of these guys are playing a shell game, to be honest with you. Like, they probably like had paid porn subscriptions and the whole deal.
Well, you know, yeah, I mean, they'll overlook, you know, public boys being boys thing, and then they'll end up with a guy like Larry Craig who's taking his wide stance there in the men's room, you know, because they're blind to anything beyond the surface.
Yeah, exactly. It's I've talked about this on like I've posted this comment a long time ago on one of Matt Forney's Facebook post, and it was something along the lines of how like a lot of men in the church, especially like the Ned Flanders types, they only care about the sins that people could see. They don't really care so much about their inner lives. So like for them, like living with your girlfriend is bad and cursing is bad because there are sins that other people could see. While, you know, visiting Pornhub, not such a big deal.
Well, again, a lot of it with them is manners versus morality. There's large swaths of the evangelical leadership where their personality is basically Ted Knight's character in Caddyshack.
I haven't seen that movie.
Well, then you should, when you're done with this stream, go watch Caddyshack. But it's just and it sounds almost fedora to say, but it's just an old fuddy-duddy who sits there and is a pearl clutcher. You know, I actually heard somebody, it was that Eric Metaxas guy I mentioned, talk about how Trump was one of the of some of the poorest character that we've ever had in the White House. And I thought, you really look, I mean, the guy's no saint, but you really think that is a worse man than the last three guys? I mean, you could just look at something like the fact that Trump has raised several well-adjusted kids, despite the fact that they grew up in opulence and went through a divorce, and they're still all well-adjusted, and none of them have spent daddy's money putting it up their nose. Whereas, you know, Obama's kids are two twerking little savages, and, you know, W's kids are constantly on Girls Gone Wild throughout the 2000s.
Yeah,
Clinton
that
is a rapist.
Well,
Yeah, Bill
well,
Clinton.
also like Clinton's kid is like a Democrat politician. Worst of all,
Clinton is her, Chelsea's her mother's daughter, that's for sure.
yeah, yeah,
We know that part at least.
yeah.
And Webb Hubbles too.
Yeah, that's what we got to talk about.
Like, I think I've lost my train of thought. I was gonna make a comment, but it just like flew out of my mind. It's also like, okay, now I think I'd rather have a politician, a leader that excels in masculine virtue as opposed to one that excels in religious piety, or at least like the modern Christian interpretation of piety,
Well,
which
you know,
I call pietism, if you guys heard that word before.
I mean, the New Testament is all full of the distinction between genuine faith and being a Pharisee. You know,
Yeah, exactly.
That's a perfect example. You know, I often use the expression that I'd rather deal with an honest whore than a crooked preacher. You know,
That's a good one.
and that's what it comes down to. The worst you could say about Trump is he's an honest whore.
Yeah, that's so true.
You know, whereas the last Republican president, I'd put him squarely in the crooked preacher camp.
I don't know. I remember referring to election 2016 as Ricky Roma versus Cersei Lannister, and I pretty much stick by that.
Hey guys, it's been good, but I have to get up early tomorrow, so I'm gonna have to invoke the 2-hour time limit. But guys, it's been really good talking to all of you. I think this is one of the really good ones we've had. So, we're all ready to wrap up, or does anybody have any final thing they want to say?
Well, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming. It was good to have you.
Go in Christ. God bless.
All right,
Yeah.
no,
Thanks to everyone who tuned in the live stream chat also.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
via
had over-
Hundios, my darlings.
We had like 31 viewers at one point. That's pretty good for us.
Wow.
So I'll just real quick. Thank you, Anti-Dem. Thank you, the BECHTLOFF. Thank you, Lumen Sol. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, LUE-YEE, who's here for like 5 seconds. And thank you, Sam KEVORKIAN, for joining us. We'll see you next time. And to everyone who's listening, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a good night, everyone.